Rachel. I'm a librarian here at Sunnyvale Library, and I'm very, very excited to have this. This is like a dream come true for me. So yay, thanks for coming, and thanks to the Friends of the Sunnyvale Library for supporting this whole event. Also, the Digital Game Museum and Bill Kendricks, who sprinkled all these people to bring tons of games. Thank you.
My name is Judith, and I'm the director of the Digital Game Museum. Yes, there is, in fact, a Digital Game Museum right here in Silicon Valley. We are the only professionally managed game museum on the West Coast, as a matter of fact. We're tiny, and we are in Santa Clara, and you can find the address on the website. We're open from 10 until 4 every Saturday. We hope you'll come and visit, but preferably not all at once, because it's only 1,000 square feet. And we proved last week, where's Nick? We proved last week that we can handle about 22 people at a time. They have to be people that get along really well. So do come by and visit. Sign up for our mailing list. We don't spam. We're way too lazy, and we have no social skills, so we won't do that. But we do send out a newsletter once a month, which I write. So occasionally it's really funny, occasionally it's really stupid, and occasionally it's actually useful. I wonder what that is. I don't care. There we go. And let's see, what else do I want to tell you? We exist by the grace of our corporate donors and our board and the very kind people who sign up and send us some money every month. Many of our donors send us $5 a month, and even that helps. So if you're feeling flush, please go sign up, and it's on the website, and add us to your charity list. We need your help. You can also designate us as your charity of choice when you buy from Amazon. Amazon Smile gives us a cut, as it were. It's not a big cut. It's not really a slice. It's kind of a nibble, but it's something. And so sign up. Oh, I see somebody saying that they've done that, and we pulled in $40 last month. Doesn't sound like a lot, but you know, enough $40 will get us more space. We think we're in danger of losing our lease. I know, right? I mean, is that a lie? But we actually think we are, and we would like to move to a space that's twice as big so that we can actually have events in-house, we can have game tournaments, and we can have more than 22 people in at a time, even if they don't get along. And we need your help to do that, so please keep us in mind and be charitable. And it is one of the best parts, actually I think it's actually the best part, of being the director of a game museum is you get to work with gamers, and you get to meet gamers, and because we're in Silicon Valley, we get to meet people who are the essence of the game industry. And so it's my great pleasure to introduce to you the creator of Pong, Alcorn.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, great. Plug this in. So yeah, I think it's really nice to have this thing in Sunnyvale, because Sunnyvale was where Pong was introduced. The first Pong was over yonder on El Camino Real, Handicapped Tavern. And anyway, I'll get to that story in a minute. So I grew up in San Francisco, Lowell High School, and I was precocious. This is one of my high school classmates' store for selling chemicals. All the chemicals that you might want to have today would be bad to have, but yeah, sulfuric acid, nitric acid, precocious. And I got into Cal Berkeley, basically do football. I was a football jock, and I sneaked in with mediocre grades and played for about 1 week on the football team and said, I'm going to either be a football player or an engineer. I think I'm going to go for engineering. So I quit the team. And then I paid my way through school by fixing TVs. It's kind of important. Back when I was a young kid, my neighbor across the street had a TV shop on Hay Street near Fillmore. And I went down there from junior high school on, fixing radios and TVs. I loved television, electronics, and things. And eventually when I got to Cal, I was able to pay my way through school by working at the repair shop right off the campus. And so I managed to get a degree. I wanted to be an analog engineering, but Cal, I could only get a degree in electrical engineering and computer science. So the computer science stuff, I said, I'll put up with it, but thank goodness I did, because that paid off. And I was also involved in a little bit of activism. There were some riots going on in Berkeley protesting the war in Vietnam, and there was an issue of People's Park. There was a park that the city, the school took over, and there was a book. There was a big riot, and I took some pictures in the book, that picture too. But anyway, colorful days. Those were the 60s. I then got a job work study at Ampex in 1968. Ampex video file, which was just wonderful because I met a lot of the guys that did videotape recording and real professional engineers. You talk about mentors. I think mentors are very important, and I learned from the best there for a few years. And but I had learned digital electronics against my desires. They force-fed that into me, but that was the important thing. And I was doing analog design, analog stuff, using digital circuits. And so I was fairly valuable. I had those skills. And I met a lot of very interesting people. Noah Bushnell, Ted Dabney, Steve Mayer, Larry Emmons, Patty Ewart, etc. There were many, and these were early people that all wound up forming Atari. So when I was at Ampex, in 1972, Ampex was dying. It had some first financial setback and trouble. It was a glorious place for an engineer to work, but it started getting less pleasant. They had to consolidate. They had to save money. They were in the audio music business. They were selling audio tapes, but they didn't do it right, and it was awful. And about that same time, Nolan had left, and he went off to Nutting Associates, a company here in Mountain View or Sunnyvale that made arcade games. They made a game called Computer Quiz. So here was a coin-operated game manufacturer right in this area. Most of them were in Chicago, Valley, Midway, Philadelphia, places like that. So on the West Coast, so Nolan basically cut a deal with them. He invented this game called Computer Space, which was really a coin-operated, dedicated version of the old Space War game that Steve Russell designed on the PDP-1 software. And the original plan for Nolan was to get a mini computer and to have it run an arcade and have like 10 video games all being serviced by this one computer. Didn't make any economic sense, but that was his vision at the time. And as he was doing this work for that, while he was working at Ampex, we call the G job, doing two different jobs at the same time, getting paid by one guy, the story is he had written a check to buy a couple of these mini computers. In those days, it was about $2,000 a copy. And his wife was so sure this was a dumb idea, she never mailed the check. Well, about the time he expected the computers to show up, he realized he didn't need the computers anymore, because the computers were so slow in those days that they couldn't do anything at video speeds, and he was just keeping track of where things were, and you could do that with some flip-flops and some gates, which is what he did. And the computers never showed up, he never spent the money, and boom, he had a video game, Computer Space. It was not a very easy game to play, it didn't do that well. They sold a few of them. I mean, they sold about 1,000 of them, I think, maybe. But Nolan said, look, you give me some stock in this company, Mr. Nutting, and I'll be the VP of engineering, and we'll make this a big company. And Bill Nutting told him, you're just an engineering kid, I'm an executive, and no way I'm going to do that. So Nolan went off and started this company called Syzygy, S-Y-Z-Y-G-Y, the last S in the dictionary, good for hangman. And he comes over and he takes me to lunch. He and Ted Dabney took me to lunch. And I was just this engineer at Ampex and making $1,200 a month. And he offered me a job at Syzygy for $1,000 a month and 10% of the stock. Well, I knew the stock was worthless. And $1,000 a month was less than I was making in Amtax, but it was going to be a heck of a lot more fun. And I figured it would die. People did not do stars back then. This is a modern thing. Back in 1972, one did not quit a good job at Amtax. In fact, the president sat Nolan down, the president of Amtax, and said, son, you're making a big mistake quitting a career, because you get the gold watch, the handshake, the pension, you know, this is what life was like. And, no, we're going to do this. So then I joined them. On the lark, I figured it would fail, but I go, okay, hire me back to Amtax if it fails. So I learned so much about all this other stuff I couldn't see. So Nolan tells me to, my first project was, he said, okay, I want to design this video game he described, Pong. One ball moving around, 2 scores, a net, that's it. And the simplest game. What Nolan was really doing was he was giving me an exercise to design the simplest game, which he didn't think was going to be commercially viable, because he thought the game was going to be a driving game or a complex game. He didn't tell me this. He didn't think that would motivate me, so he used a trick he's used many years called lying. And he told me he got a contract from General Electric for a home version, a home game. Like, wow, it's got to be cheap. You know, so, okay, I'll go at it. And I had parts left over from Amtax, and I started wiring this thing up, and no one ever called from GE or came by or wrote us a letter. It didn't occur to me. I was busy doing that, playing pinballs at the time. So this was the world headquarters where Atari was started, Syzygy/Atari. It's the nondescript building on Scott Boulevard, still there. People who there have no idea. and anyhow, so I think I told you about that. Yeah, so I added things up, added little parts to the game, like, you know, because I thought it was going to be a real game. And it turns out if you just make a game that did what Nolan said, the ball went, it was no fun to play. I mean, because it would be too slow, or if it was too fast, you couldn't start it. So I added the ball speed up. I added a counter, and the ball went faster as the game progressed. And then they had to reflect off the paddles. All these little things I worked out. The last one was sound. That was kind of funny because I was depressed. It was a failure because no one's had to be a consumer game, and a consumer game I knew had to have a parts cost of maybe $20. Well, I had 70 ICs in this thing, so it's going to cost like $100, $150 for this board. So it was really a failure, pretty colossal failure in that regard. But no one didn't seem perturbed by it. That didn't occur to me to be, that's no problem, so you're going to throw it away. And but I made the game playable, and the last thing, well, it needs sound. And I said, okay, what do you want? He says, I want the roar of a crowd of thousands cheering. I didn't know how to do that. Individual circuits, one and zero, I couldn't do that. There was no computer, there was no microprocessor. This was back in the day when Intel had just come out with the 4004. And that thing was so slow you could watch it work. So I poked around for about an hour or two inside the game in the sync generator for tones that were already there and gated them out. I said, there's the sound. And I said, no, if you want anything else, here's a wire wrap, then you go do it. I'm not going to do it. That's it. So years later, they came out, the sounds were profound. Oh, there's something. Yeah. You did the sound. I did the sound. Yeah. Oops. So there's that's Rooster Teeth Feathers. It used to be Andy Capp's Tower, and there's a little sign on the wall at Rooster Teeth Feathers saying I think it kind of perturbs them a little bit because they're trying to sell drinks, entertainment. People just what Paul was playing. And so what happened was this is the original Pong. It is the prototype. There's the board that I wire wrapped, never meant to be out on location. It was just meant to be in the box or on the desktop. Actually, it was also, I rigged it up so it could play on Channel 3 on a television set. I took it home in 1972 for Christmas, and my brother's 6, 7-year-old kids played it. And Uncle Freddie said, it will never sell. They liked it, the kids liked it, so. Anyway, but I didn't think I did play the darn thing, This cat Weekend by Ted Dabney. We had this coin mech on the side here that was from a laundromat, and the word Pong, which meant nothing back then, no instructions, and 2 knobs. And in the back was a TV set that we modified, make a monitor out of. And so why would anybody play this thing? I mean, like, what's the, you know, there was a computer space next to it. So we took a handicapped tower and put it on a barrel top and let it play. And we watched. I remember the first guy who played it, Nolan and I sat back and watched. And he said, well, what do you think? And he says, oh, yeah, I know the guys that did that stuff. I go, oh, boy. I said, save the bullshit for the ladies, you know. So, anyhow, so shortly thereafter, the game stopped working. Well, given the way it was built, it did not surprise me at all. So I went there to fix it after work, and it was about 2 weeks after we first put it in. And the first thing I would do was open the coin box, give myself a free game to see if, because the screen and track mode was there. And I opened the coin box up, and it was just so full of quarters it wouldn't take anymore. So wow, so I filled my pockets full of quarters. I gave my business card to Bill Gaddis, the manager, said, hey, just call me direct when this happens again. And I went back the next day and I said, dumped the quarters out. I said, Nolan, this is a good sign, I think. Like, whoa, what's going on here? You know, like the wheels are turning here, like, this is not what we had expected at all. Because we were going to scrap it. I guess he was going to scrap it if he wanted the real game. I don't know. We had a contract from Bally. We did have a contract from Bally to design them an arcade video game, a pinball machine, and then a weird arcade attraction of some kind. And Nolan now knew that this game was hot and did not want to sell it, give it to Bally. He had a problem, but he managed to convince them they didn't want it. We were going to be a contract engineering company. The idea was we would do those wonderful designs for new video games and license them to big places like Bally, and we'd receive checks. And but Nolan realized that the real money was in manufacturing, so he convinced us to be a manufacturer and convinces Bally not to take Pong. This is a picture of the circuit board. In fact, in the lobby, there is a cocktail table Pong, which has one of these boards in it. And oddly enough, I fixed the game. The monitor was broken. The board was made back in 1973, and it still works. I mean, it's amazing. Yeah, I had a black and white TV set in at the time. To buy a monitor back in those days, there was no liquid crystal stuff, okay? It was just cathode ray tube. A monitor from Motorola cost like $200 or $300, and they were green. They used them in airports, and they never worked. They were awful. And so I just went to Payless or some Walgreens drugstore and bought a black and white Hitachi TV set, and that's what we used for the production of Pong. We modified it. My experience fixing TVs, I knew how to quickly turn it into a monitor and get rid of all that tuner stuff, and I used the audio amp that was in there. And here's the tear sheet for the first Pong. That's what it looked like in the arcade shipping. For that, we did add instructions. And that was another funny one, I think. Nolan said it has to have instructions. And I said, no. I mean, if you have to read directions to play a video game, you're in trouble. Now we got to have instructions. We argued about it. And I said, well, pinball machines don't have instructions. He said, yes, they do. I was playing pinball machines all the time. We had a bunch of them back there. So we go out there, darn it, they don't have instructions. In the lower left-hand corner, no one ever read them, but there it is. So step one was insert quarter. Ball will serve automatically. And step 3 was avoid missing ball for a high score. Words to live by. So this is the original team. There I am with more hair. There's Ted Dabney. There's Nolan, and there's our ill-fated chief financial officer, who didn't last very long at all. So Pong was a hit. The other thing that was weird about Pong was to this day, the only game I know of that requires 2 players. It's got no one-player mode. And so that's another reason why it should never have worked. I mean, but I think one of the reasons it was successful, was the subdued cabinet that it was. Didn't have all the girly graphics on it like pinball machines and like it in bigger, better locations. And I think it appealed to women more than pinball machines. And so I think that opened up a market for it. Nolan would claim it was, he picked the colors, black and yellow, black for mystery and yellow for excitement. And here is a picture that I found. It's very low res. This is our Martin Street facility, a roller skating rink in Santa Clara, an old roller skating rink. And there's a floor full of pongs, probably 200 pongs. My wife can remember me coming home in this day saying, Nolan is crazy. He wants to build 100 pongs a day. We had no money. We literally had no investors, no money, no facilities. And so, okay, no, I just gave up. You go right ahead, it's going to blow up, and I want to watch it. It's going to be a big explosion when it blows. He did. So what next? So now we have Pong, and the Atari starts to grow. Everybody was stealing Pong. I think everybody has different guesses. I think we made about 3,000 Pongs back in the day, and I think there were probably 12,000 sold of copies. Everybody copied them. And we had the next game was Gotcha and Space Race, and everybody just copied our games, and we were like the advanced development group for everybody else. So Nolan, this is, I think, you can't read it, so I'll read it for you. This is a memo that I managed to keep, dated August 3rd, and 1973. And it's to engineering from Nolan Bushnell, and it says, in accordance with a concise business plan, the following is the charter for engineering. We had no business plan, concise or otherwise, I can assure you. We just did it, and But he said have a bunch of production-ready machines. It was hard because we had no facilities or equipment. But okay, fix the coin door. We got a bread pan and a coin that wasn't good enough. We had to have a real coin door like Chicago. That took some doing. Get a staff so we could do weird projects. 20-player gotcha game, custom install for an arcade. We never did that, thank God. Packaging for Dr. Pong, Puppy Pong, which we did. And then item 6, packaging and a printed circuit board for a color modulated consumer Pong. Item 6. If you think about it, that's a new industry. Home video games. That's item 6. Develop a staff to provide game documentation, design a booth for the trade show. We did design a booth for the trade show. It was so bad, it would have caught on fire if we turned it on. The city wouldn't let us turn it on. So anyway, that was to engineering. It said, statements concerning our manufacturing capacity are inapplicable to the above design schedule. Because we were arguing about it. He says, Nolan, we have no ability to make any of the stuff you want to make. We can make a little bit, not all of it. So I wrote a memo back. From engineering, August 3rd, 1973. In accordance with your memo dated August 3rd, will statements regarding our financial capability be applicable to the above design schedule? Signed by me, Vice President Engineering. And Nolan just wrote on the memo, no. Okay, so I picked item 6. I said, that looks like fun. And it's a longer story behind it. I don't have all the time to tell, but I was trying to design a custom chip into the video games that would be used in all of our video games that would make it impossible for the copiers. So it wasn't to save money, it was just obscure, so it would be hard to steal our stuff. The guy I had do it was Harold Lee. He was an engineer that came out, lived up in the Santa Cruz Mountains, still does. He's a mountain man. He's got a big master's degree in EE, chip design, brilliant, but kind of like a Hell's Angel type at the time. So it was really a very colorful guy, but I like to hire colorful people. And so when he said, I think I can put Pong on a chip, so let's do it. And I didn't think we could do it. But again, I was doing item 6 on Noel's list. It kept me off my back, and I got to give up the coin-op stuff, which I got tired of because it was just work. and I had to do something, learn how to do a chip, see how far we could get before it blew up. So I gave Cornell Engineering to Steve Bristow, and we went off, and my wife wire wrapped the thing. I have a picture of it here. This is the prototype wire wrap of the consumer phone. It's a huge panel, and there is a mock-up of what the case is going to look like. We didn't have a case. I figured the case has got to be easy. The chip's got to be the hard thing to do, so I focused on the chip. And, well, it turns out the case takes about, you know what you're doing. It takes, in those days, took about 4 or 5 months. It cost a lot more money to do with the chip, and we didn't know what we were doing. But we managed to pull it out. It was a disaster. We pulled it out of the fire, and it did work. We had to go through, so I remember the day in the lab when we used a company called AMI, Advanced Microsystems. Ironically, their facility is right where Apple is building their new flying saucer place. So I'm going to go digging around there. Semiconductor places are not, they've got a lot of nasty chemicals come out of it. Anyway, so the chip comes in from the vendor from AMI, and it cost us like $50,000 to make that first chip. And I plugged it in, and it worked. And it felt like a dog chasing a car. What do you do if you catch it? We had no business plan, concise or otherwise. And it was like, wow, holy moly, we're going to be in the consumer business. We got a product. And so, again, having no plans further than getting the chip, marketing guy called up and we thought, what would we do with this? Because there was no consumer electronics in the valley, no games, none of that stuff. So we said, well, Sears and Roebuck, they have that big building in Chicago. They're a big consumer company. Yeah. So we called Chicago. Cold call, the Sears Tower, explained, and they passed us off to the gal looked through the catalog at her desk at the receptionist, telephone operator, and said, well, they're selling the Magnavox Odyssey game, which was kind of a bad, but it was a home game, and they're selling it in sporting goods department. Odd. 606, well, I'll pass you up, and the buyer was there, Tom Quinn, and he answers the phone, and basically we explain who we are. We have this version of Pong and consumer product, and Tom was frustrated with Magnavox, and they would not let him sell that machine, the Magnavox Odyssey, in the stores, only in the catalog, because Magnavox was the last of the dying, the first of the dying American consumer electronics companies. They thought their job was to sell big, huge television sets. And here they had the first video game. They could have owned the industry, and they didn't really want to sell it. They just wanted you to think they had to buy a Magnavox TV to play it. So when we tell him that we've got this thing and we're not Magnavox and we'll sell it to you guys, he said, well, the next time I'm in California, I'll stop in and see you guys. 3 days later, he was on our doorstep at 8 o'clock in the morning with suit and tie. Well, none of us were there at 3 o'clock in the morning. And I think I was the first one to roll in about 9. And this guy sitting, who's this guy? He's serious. Oh, really? Well, here. And he was stunned, amazed, befuddled, and didn't know what he had, because he wasn't used to dealing with companies like Atari, where there was probably nobody over 30. There was the smell of rope burning in the back. I mean, it was, not what he was used to, but we had this game. And so it was a real push, because it had a lot more problems. And it's one of these things, if I'd known how much trouble it was going to be, I never would have done it. Because I just thought you'd do a ship the product, put it in the box. That's it, boom, make money, cash checks. Well, there was this thing called the FCC, and these things made a lot of interference. This was the first digital home video game, and the rules the FCC had were written around the Magnavox Odyssey game that was analog, not digital. And the digital circuit switches very fast, and because it switches that fast, it makes RF interference right out, in this case over 100 megahertz. The regulations assumed there wouldn't be any of that, so they were like nothing out there at this frequency. So it was very, very difficult, and Sears was very helpful. Another thing that happened that I think is very important was we said, well, so Tom Quinn, we're negotiating to do a contract, and Tom says, what's the price? And like, Joe Keenan, the president, Nolan Bushnell, and I, let's go off and meet for a minute. So we go in the other room, we start to argue. Yeah, how much does it cost, Al? And so I'm quickly trying to figure out what it costs to make these things. And I left out, and it's funny because I realized a few days later I left out a thing, one little item called the factory in my calculation. They built themselves. But Nolan just pricing his confidence, and he priced it at like $75. I figured it would cost us maybe $25, $30 to make them. I don't know. Wasn't sure, but we had enough margin. So how many can you make? We said 75,000. And this was an order for 150,000. We go, and Nolan and Joe think, hey, wait a second. We don't want to be sole source to Sears. We don't want to have Sears be our only customer, because if they stop, we're going to just go out of business. We've got to have other customers. Well, Tom Quinn said, I hear what you're saying, but you don't need to worry, man. We're going to pay you. We don't have to worry about bad debts. We never sold a consumer product. We didn't know all that people don't pay their bills. There's all kinds of tricks they do. We found out later. But so we said, we're going to go to the Toy Fair in New York in 1975. We were going to be in the Christmas catalog in 1975, I think, at Sears. We went to the Toy Fair in New York, and we showed it. We had a booth at the Javits Center. It wasn't even the right, we didn't know what we were doing. And we were there for a week, and we showed Pong. I remember personally showing it to vice presidents, marketing managers at Macy's, all big retailers, Kenny's. We did not sell one consumer Pong. Now here was a product that was going to be the hit of the decade, and we were offering it for sale to all the stores out there, and not one store bought it. You know, and so just because somebody says it's bad or good doesn't necessarily mean they're right. And so we went into the year with sole source to Sears. There was another interesting meeting I'm going to go into, an event that happened in that at the final sale. We had to meet with the senior executives at Sears and Roebuck in that tall building on the 37th floor of the Sears Tower, and convinced it was okay for the execs to authorize this thing. So we had this was the prototype we had, and we're in a nice conference room with glass ceilings, city of Chicago outside, and I'm looking up to work on Channel 3 on a television set that they loaned us from Sears, and put it on there, and I realized it's not working. And it wasn't working because they broadcast from Channel 3 on top of the Sears Tower. So our marketing guy did a song and dance, and I opened the bottom of the box up and retuned the RF section up here to Channel 4. Okay, on with the demo. So I did the demo, and Carl Lynn, the vice president of the division, his previous claim to fame, you may be aware, may have heard about, the air-conditioned electric blanket. No, anyway, so he was not into high-tech that much, and he sees that thing, and he says, Mr. Alcorn, you're telling me that you're going to take that rat's nest of red wires up there, and you're going to put it on a tiny little piece of silicone the size of your fingernail? I said, yes, sir. How are you going to solder the wires to it? And I said, you know, like, I don't belong in this place. This is like, I've gone too far. Well, he went along with the gag, and we eventually took him to AMI facility and showed him the semiconductor line. And he thought, well, make the chips bigger. That'll make it. Anyway, his instincts were wrong. So so if you look at this, is one of the very first Pongs, home Pongs, and it actually, you can't read it here, but it says Sears Telling Aid and Pong. It doesn't say Atari anywhere but on the fine print in the back. And it was the best thing that ever happened to us, because I remember sitting at home one night watching Monday Night Football, and there ran an ad for my game on Monday Night Football. I didn't have to do anything about it, and Sears just paid us on time. There was never bad debt, and it just was wonderful. It was a great thing for us, but eventually we went beyond it. So we realized soon after, there was a string of dedicated video games, like Pong doubles, 4-player Pong, quadra Pong, home, but each one was a new custom chip, and that was very expensive and time consuming. So we knew we had to have a cartridge, a microprocessor-driven cartridge-based game. And so we worked on that. This project was started in Grass Valley in 1976, early. Nolan signed a license, a deal with patent settlement. Magnavox had the patent on all video games. It was a valid patent, but anyway, it was. And they sued us, and we settled. The funny part was we signed that agreement. Nolan signed it in Chicago a week before the Consumer Electronics Show in Chicago in 1976. And part of the agreement was any new product we released in the one calendar year, or 365 days after we signed the agreement, Magnavox would get the rights to manufacture and sell. So that was great because we introduced the VCS cartridge game in 1977 at the Consumer Electronics Show in Chicago to great acclaim. And it was a wonderful thing, and I was so glad Jay Miner was one of the chief chip designer, and the whole team got to go to Chicago and witness that. It was just really a lot of fun to just take over the show. And in fact, we have a whole fight going with National Semiconductor. I'll go into the details of all that, but they misbehaved and they were trying to steal our product too. They actually just tried to copy Pong, home Pong, and sell under us. But we wound up basically hiring their entire engineering staff. Really good. And it was funny because at that CES show, one of the guys, Rick Simone, went by the national booth, and one of the marketing guys calls Rick into the back and says, "Hey Rick, you got to get that microprocessor game you're working on out because Atari's killing us with this VCS." And Rick said, "I'm sorry, but I'm working for Atari now." So at that time, we realized we needed a lot more money if we're going to do this consumer stuff, to buy inventory and stuff like that. So we actually tried to do a public offering, and the economy didn't justify it at the time. So we looking for suitors to buy the company: Disney, Quaker Rhodes, Parker Brothers, I don't know. Wanted Warner. And we thought Warner was good because they were in the hit record business, the movie business, so they understood successes and failures. Not every company, a lot of companies like Procter & Gamble assumes everything's going to be a hit. And in the entertainment business, if you can get a third of them to be successes, you're doing well. And you have to tolerate the losses. And so that was the idea, and that worked well for a few years. Here's the prototype of the Atari VCS. Doesn't show much. It's at the Computer History Museum. It was done up in Grass Valley. Oh, here's Nolan. There were lots of stories about. We had fun. I mean, we obviously worked hard. We did a lot of stuff, but we didn't take ourselves that seriously either. And we wanted to have a lot of fun doing it because we risked the company every year. We were all young and crazy, and so you might as well have fun on the way out, even if you're going to lose. And I remember a few board meetings in the hot tub and stuff like that. So, we made a lot of mistakes. We bet the company every year. And then eventually, I'll talk a little bit about the end. Warner Management came in. How do I put this? In Silicon Valley, as most of you know, we're in a business here, an environment where that if you don't obsolete your own products, somebody else will. That's not understood. Back in those days, And they put a guy in charge, Ray Gassar, very nice man, but he was from Burlington Industries back east, and they had evergreen products, and he just didn't understand the Silicon Valley ethos. He did not understand the game business. He didn't really play games that much. It was business, and the whole thing shifted. At the same time, the VCS took off like a rocket, and I believe in 1982 or 83, VCS sales, cartridge sales were in around $2 billion. It was huge. By this time, by 1981, well, Nolan and Joe had already been asked to leave, and then I left in 81. I had done a holographic product. The last thing I did was a product called Cosmos. We couldn't keep a secret at Atari except for the VCS because we had to. So we would put out disinformation, and one of the things I would talk about would we'd say we were doing holography, a holographic video game. Like, wow. It was bullshit, but and here we were in 1980, 81, and I figured, well, I got nothing else to do around here. They're not really talking. I'm going to go back into engineering and get a good design team together, Roger Hector and Harry Jenkins, and we're going to do a holographic game. And like, wow, what does that mean? So I looked up a little bit more, learned a little bit more about holography, and made some prototypes. And we came up with it. Ray Gassar said, well, if you could make a cartridge-based game system that's half the cost of the VCS, that would be a good idea. So okay, so we did that, and the trick was the cartridge in the VCS cartridge had one chip in it. So how do you cut that cost down? You get rid of the chip altogether, and that's what we did. We had a hologram in there, and we actually invented embossed holography. Holograms at the time were made by a laser with film, and that meant they cost $5 or $10 a piece. Period. They took minutes to make, and we figured out a way to make in production, stamp them out, ka-chink, 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 and they cost pennies a piece. So we did that, and we tooled the case up. I don't have a picture of it here, but I've got 2 prototypes at home. There's not many left. And they wouldn't sell. They wouldn't let us sell. And I realized that at that point Atari was dead, even though they were over $1 billion in sales. And if you're not going to refresh your product lineup every year, you're going to be dead. And by 83, they died a hard, fast death. Sad, but they died that death. So let me see. Afterwards, I worked at. Don't get me wrong. I am really not a game player. I'm an engineer. I'm an engineer that designed video game. The first ones, and that was a lot of fun. But since then, I was involved with ETAC, Stan Honey, Andrew bought the Sente games, and Kuma. I went to work at Apple as an Apple Fellow. I went to work at Apple after Steve Jobs had left. I know I didn't mention it, but I hired this kid, back in, 74. Dropped out of Reed College. I said, is Reed a engineering school? No, it's a literary school. Oh, and he dropped out. Well, okay, I'm looking for a tech. And the kid could solder. And he's a hippie, and he's 18 years old, so we're talking cheap. You know, but he was enthused. He did have this real enthusiasm. You know, so I figured, hey, you know, if you're enthused, so I hired him, thank goodness. That was Steve Jobs, and he, the engineer was not pleased because they didn't connect, anyhow, yeah, he had this crazy idea for a home computer. I didn't think it was something I could use one because I'm a nerd, but my wife would want one. Why would she do one of these things? So we helped them out, and they offered us the Apple II, and we passed on it. But I liked the guys. Woz was really bright, and they were young, and so I introduced them to Don Valentine, a venture capitalist. He was on our board. He could work for us. And Don comes back and he says, Al, they're in a garage. I said, well, isn't that the Silicon Valley story? They're in a garage. You know, yeah, but it's a car in the garage. Get them space. Get them a little space. Okay, so that worked out pretty well. Anyway, I went to work for them, and as an Apple Fellow, I worked with them for several years in the research group, and we got to play with the great computer, and I got to work on motion pictures of multimedia, digitizing movies, videos, and sound, so they were a digital element in the computer. John Louis Gasset and John Scully thought it was a dumb idea, which was great, I realized later, because had they seen how important multimedia was going to be, QuickTime, etc., they would have put it on the schedule, they would have given you marketing support, legal support, would have ruined the whole thing. So as it worked out, we had the best design team in the world. We worked with the rest of the worldwide community, Motion Picture Experts Group, MPEG, and a standard was born. It was probably one of the best standards that ever came out, and to this day it's still vibrant. So that was a lot of fun. So I did that. It wasn't a video game, a lot of fun. I worked at Digital FX with Steve Mayer, the first desktop authoring machine. Oh, I started a slot machine company called Silicon Gaming. That was fun. Silicon Valley meets Vegas. Disc-based slot machine with a big display. Pablo here worked on it. That was a lot of fun. Because one of the things I realized was that engineers coming out of college now, they don't see anything more than 5 volts. And back when I was coming out, man, you get shocks all the time. And we had to make a TV set, and we had this big CRT, 16 by 9 CRT, and it needed 20,000 volts. and there's all these other engineers fresh out of college who are like, oh my God, you're gonna die. Ah, don't worry, the chargers up your batteries, you know? So, and then I worked at Interval Research after that. Paul Allen's think tank, that was a lot of fun. About 100 of the smartest people in the world, and me, around there. And I did a kids play set called Zowie. It worked, but had a lot of fun. So anyway, I thought I'd give some time to people now when I ask some questions, perhaps. Puzzle into questions I might be able to answer. Yeah.
Just wondering, Packbox seemed to have something very similar to what you guys had. How come they didn't do better?
Well, yeah, in the big picture, they had the first really home video game. And I give Ralph Baer a lot of credit for doing it, because it was against the grain. He was working at basically what is now Lockheed, and doing this is what they call a G job. Do you know what a G job is? The older people will know. I know a guy who worked at Lockheed and rebuilt his motor in his car on government money. He could do all these funny things, all this equipment. Anyway, he built that game. It was all analog, so it didn't really have the play value. But that's not the problem. The problem was Magnavox, and Magnavox picked it up, but they just saw it as a way to sell televisions. They didn't really think they were in the game business. They didn't want to be in the game business. And it was sad, and poor Ralph, you know, put his heart into this thing and really invented some of the fundamental stuff. And so they just didn't get it, thank goodness, and we did. And they never really built, they made a fortune off of Ralph's patent. Ralph didn't make a fortune off his patent, but they did. So, and that was great for us because we got a paid up license. We were the first to settle with them. Everybody else had to pay an ongoing royalty. So we said, well, that's a great patent. We love that patent. Yeah, we've got a license to it now. So that's what happened. Any other questions? Yeah.
I owned a Pong arcade for 32 years. I got it out of Mountain View, some guy's garage. I had it looked at by a couple of guys that I believe were early employees, and they sort of gave me some commentaries about what denoted to be a very early version. Could you notate anything that might add to that, or what were the things that on the very first ones you built when it wasn't in mass production that might have made them different or stand out from all the later ones?
The early Pong machines, you're asking if there is any distinctive difference between an early one and a later one?
Yeah.
Well, the only difference really okay, I'll tell you some technical differences, but I got to tell you, there is a serial number on the units. And they were, no one, of course, would not start at 0, because then people were never going to be made. So I don't know what he started at, but from there on it was sequential. So that will tell you that somebody kept, if somebody kept track of them, you can figure that out. The very first machines there were some problems, some teething problems in the machines. The first problem we had on that production line, you saw the picture in the warehouse with all those machines on the floor. A guy comes up to me, they basically move parts around on the floor and that roller skating rink on skateboards. And he says, "Hey Al, did you know you get a free game with the cue ball?" I go, "What?" We had a pool table here, right? So you take the cue ball and you hit on the coin map, one of the bolts on the coin map really hard, boom, you get a free game. So I added a capacitor to it. So it's got a Rev E board, it's one of the later ones, and most of them have Rev E boards. It will say on the circuit board what Rev it is. And then another problem we had was static electricity. So what we would do is Nolan and Ted Dabney and I would occasionally go out to one of our locations. We had a bunch of pinball machines. We had about 50 machines in the area at different places like Handicaps and pizza parlors, the Dutch Goose, Stanford Student Union, Tresidder. And we'd go out to one of these locations, and the way it worked, we would get the coins out of the machine, divide them in half. And half would go to the location that had the machine, and we keep the other half. That's how the business worked in those days. So we would go to one of these locations, this is a pizza parlor, and we'd do that, and then take the coins that we got and buy ourselves lunch. And I remember going out to the machine sitting in the back, and it was one of those cold winter days. It was near the University of Santa Clara. And I walked out of the machine and threw a spark on it, and the game started playing. No. So that was about 3 weeks of hell to figure out how to stop that. That also is in the Rev E board. So there's some modifications made for the later ones. Other than that, I wasn't looking at them. I was too busy designing the next game. Yeah.
So this isn't a fun question, but when you were doing the 2600 and Activision started making cartridges, how did that come about?
Oh, a good question. The question was, well, how did Activision emerge? Activision was a company that wanted making better games for the VCS than we did. When Ray Kassar took over Atari, I'd like to start this. The engineers, the guys that wrote the cartridge, the video game cartridges, and they were the guys that started Activision, Whitehead, Miller, Crane, Kaplan. They were getting a salary. Those days, $60,000 or some, a decent salary for those days, and that was it. And they were not stupid, and they wanted to get a piece of the action. They wanted a small royalty, and I thought that was reasonable. But Ray Kassar was there, and Ray had just been interviewed by Forbes and Fortune magazine. In the magazine, he said, quoted as saying, "Oh, I've had experience dealing with these engineers. They're just a bunch of high-strung prima donnas. They're a dime a dozen, and they're like the towel designers I dealt with at Burlington." Well, within a few days, we had a T-shirt made in Coinhop, because we had silk screens and stuff like that. It said, "Just another high-strung prima donna engineer." They're wearing these T-shirts, and so there became some hostility at that point, and the engineers, and Ray was flat out, was not going to give them credit, name recognition on the cartridge, and was not going to give them a royalty. So then all of a sudden, these four guys quit, and Activision was formed, and we said, well, they can't do that. They're stealing our trade secrets. And indeed, there were trade secrets. How to program the Atari VCS was not an easy thing to do, and we argued that they, of course, knew how they could have with them. Long story short, the lawsuit did not work. Activision was born, Abachi was then born, and the worst cartridges coming out at that time were from Atari, because all the good engineers had left and getting rich, and so that was the beginning of the end of Atari. Yeah.
1974, Atari releases Touch Me in the arcade. Ralph Baer took that, ripped it off, and released it as Simon, which everybody knows, it's in stores now. What's the history behind that? Did Atari go after him for that, or what happened? Because Touch Me's disappeared since.
We didn't bother with lawsuits much. The story is that, okay, Touch Me is a game, I don't know how many of you have seen it. You've probably all seen the Simon game. You know, it's 4 buttons and 4 tones, and it plays back a tone, and you push that button, and then it does 2, and you play that back, and it keeps getting bigger. Okay. That came up because Nolan had a very brilliant idea. I said, let's make a video game that's cheaper. Let's just get rid of the video. Which is what it was. And that was done up in Grass Valley. I remember they made a really cute little prototype. This was probably in '73. And we had the board laid out and had it made. And George Farapo designed the boobs or the buttons. And the first one, it was really quite graphic. We toned that down a bit. And didn't sell a whole lot of them. And then the next to our surprise, Marvin Glass Associates licenses Ralph Baer goes to work for Marvin Glass, which is a toy design company in Chicago, and they licensed it to Milton Bradley, I think it was, or one of those companies. And like, wait a second, that's our game. No less, he's got a patent on our game. And he still alleges that it's different, but he can't tell me where the difference is. And we did not sue him because we were off building, we were making money on other stuff, and we tried to get into that game. In fact, Steve Bristow did make an Atari version of TouchMate, a handheld.
I've got the handheld version.
Yeah, and we never went anywhere with it. But the funny part was, I believe, you have to talk to Steve Bristow, but they actually tried to sue Atari on that. And that did not go well for Ralph because, you know, we had documentation that Ralph had been to a trade show where they saw, and he had written proof, he signed in, and he saw the thing before he wrote the patent, and then the manual. So it was like that case was thrown out of court. He's lucky he didn't go to jail for that. But hey, you know, they say imitation is a serious one. Yeah.
Well, speaking of ancient coin-ops, so there was the steeplechase game, and that was like an oddball only Sears cartridge.
A home game?
What was there's like 1 or 2 of those Sears only exclusive cards you never
You know,
saw.
I really can't tell you. I don't know. I don't know what was going on back in those days. I mean, I was off doing new stuff, you know, so I really didn't know that. Yeah.
If there's such a thing in the industry that you actually send people in for demographic research into arcades to see what people...
Oh yeah, demographic research into our customers. Yeah, we did some of that. We really did. We always did that early on. We were very early at that, especially in coin-op. Coin-op was great. I mean, at first coin-op supported the whole company. And then once consumer got going, it was really great to have coin-op because you could do really good testing on a new game. And you could sit there, we had college-educated people out there interviewing real players and doing that. And that got to be quite a good part of what we did. So we knew what was good about the game and what wasn't. And that really helped us. Having that coin-op stuff, knew how to make, and of course it caused some problems too, because I remember we would get unsolicited product ideas, you know, and a nightmare. And I said, well, for a while we read them, and then we realized, no, just send them back. We don't want them. But the kid would say, hey, why don't you make a home version of that arcade game you had? And by this time it had already come out, you know. And oh, what a mess that was. So.
But I mean, did you guys ever like have favorite places around the country where you could go in and sort of hunt and look and see what people were really doing?
We never looked at other games. We were always leading the pack on that.
Right.
But we had locations we had test locations that we had. They were always in the area. I don't remember going afield anywhere on that. But again, Bristow and the coin-op guys would know better than I.
You never been on here, huh?
Yeah, the back.
I heard that the early version, or one of the first home games, had a marketing material on the box of somebody playing chess.
Oh, yeah.
But it didn't actually exist, and somebody bought the console with the assumption that it had chess, and eventually he sued, and
No, we had chess. That was funny. That was a big project. That's one of the few games I really know about, because it was something that you couldn't do. The VCS, by you computer guys out there, here was the system using a 6502 microprocessor running at 2 or 3 megahertz, and it had all of 128 bytes of memory. 128 bytes. It had the ROM cartridge program was 2K. All right, so you're going to display 32 chess pieces and keep track of all of them and play a game of chess that was better than Sargon running on the Apple II. And we did. It was a tour de force of engineering. Nolan spent a lot of time on it. He loved it. I had the best engineers, Larry Bryan, not Larry Bryan, what's his name? Anyway, we had the best people working. We had Julio Kaplan, who was a grandmaster, and we didn't sell any of them. No, our customers were playing chess. So we had one, but I go to these trade shows, and occasionally you will see a chess cartridge. You get an Atari chess cartridge. They did exist. Nobody bought them, but they were out there. A lot of fun, big effort on our part.
I have one. Somehow I have one.
You have one?
I do.
Yes, well, he wants to buy one. Yeah.
Yeah, so you mentioned the business guy, coming in a suit and your work, he looked suspiciously at, you guys dressed very casually. So did the culture of dressing down in the computer industry these days, did it kind of start in the 70s with Atari and Apple and so forth?
Well, it started with Atari because Apple came out of Atari. Yeah, it was funny, when Apple interviewed me for the job, part of what they do with Apple at the time was see if you'll fit in culturally, culture at Apple. Well, it came out of Atari. So sure, I fit into that thing. Yeah, I mean, it wasn't a conscious thing other than when we started Atari, I was 24, Nolan was like 26, and Ted was an old man, probably was about his 30s or something. And we'd come from Ampex, and it was, coat and tie, 8 o'clock show up, 1 hour for lunch, leave at 5 o'clock. That was what life was like. And, and I'm out of Berkeley in the 60s, right? I'm reading Writing Revolution. And so I just said, hey, we just didn't do stuff because you're supposed to do it. We did it because we had to do it if we had to. So I don't care when you show up. If you get your job done and never show up, tell me how you do that, because I want to do that, I wasn't trying to enforce rules. We had a cash latitude, we had a collegial environment, and I hired, I guess, people, as I've said, that, and I did at any other company in 1973 and hired a guy like Steve Jobs, I would have been fired. But we hired these people because they had enthusiasm, brilliance, sparks, something, energy. And we had a lot of them. Ron Wayne, Wozniak he was working at HP at the time. So, it was just the way we did things, and we had fun. We didn't take ourselves that seriously, and why should we wear suits and ties? Nolan, had to wear suits and ties occasionally and all that, but I'm an engineer. I didn't have to ever. And Jobs took that to heart. Yeah.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about the transition from discrete to code?
From which to which?
From discrete components to code.
Oh, microprocessors? Oh, well, the changeover to when microprocessors first infected video games, I'm not sure which coin-op game it was. If there's a coin-op guy in here, he could tell you. But we did. It was finally the microprocessors got fast enough to do something about it. And then in consumer, that was a big deal. That was a big deal. And I was very much involved in that. We discovered the 6502 microprocessor at one of the West Coast computer fairs. The MOS Technologies company in Philadelphia had like a barrel of these things for like $5, $2 a piece. It was like profound. Here you had an 8-bit microprocessor that was every bit as good, if not better, than a 6800 Motorola chip at a fraction of the price. And no bullshit, but there was no development system for it either. Nothing. Here's the part, and here's the programming manual. Good luck. And that was the hot. And it was funny because there was no development system, no support, but that was the highest-selling microprocessor for probably 3 years in the world, and between us and Apple, And when we designed with it, the VCS was profoundly different than anything else. We were not the first cartridge-based game. Fairchild Channel F was one of the first. Jerry Lawson, great engineer. And he was also a field sales guy that sold to me. He disappears, and like he's head of the division making video games at Fairchild. Well, nice to see you. Jerry. We were good friends, always been good friends. But the microprocessor was very important. What happened at Fairchild is they had their own microprocessor in-house. So guess what microprocessor they used in their video game? The Fairchild Channel app. It was not as good as the other one. Plus, the way you would approach this problem is you had a memory map. You'd have a memory that had enough spot in memory for every point on the screen, right? Memory was expensive in those days. A lot of spots on the screen. Remember I said we had 128 bytes memory total? So we didn't have a memory map. And Steve Mayer is brilliant. He's a genius. And he figured out how to do this with this one custom chip called Stella, and the C502, and then a GTI PIA chip with the memory in it and some input-output ports, and that was it. 3 chips in the whole thing. So our cost was way under everybody else's. The other weird side effect of that design and architecture was because there was when you had a memory map and everything, they had hardware in the design saying, well, we're going to make a sprite that's 16 by 16 or 8 by 8 or something like that. And you had to, in hardware, embed what you thought the games were going to be. Well, because we had nothing in that VCS, it was just bare metal, and you had to program on the fly. You had to keep track of the clock and the beam, chasing the beam across the screen. If you didn't write your program fast enough, the beam would go beyond it and it wouldn't work. So it was a horrible thing to program, but because it was so stripped down, we could do all kinds of games with it. There was we could do chess. We barely do chess with that. It was kind of crude, but so it was a major advance, but it was really, our machine was different than everybody else's because it really was a stripped down lean architecture that, and I think we didn't own a semiconductor company, so that was our best. Yes, sir.
6502 was designed by 5 ex-Motorola 6800.
Right, Chuck Pettit was the leader of that team, yeah.
At the WestCon show, I was there. The chip was $20, and I don't remember. It was way cheaper.
Oh yeah.
Than anybody else. In 1971, all the company's chips, they were actually chipsets, 2 or 3 chips, cost $300.
Right. Intel.
At WestCon, I'm guessing maybe $100 then.
Yeah.
And it was a single chip.
Yeah. Yeah, but if you tried to buy it, if you bought it and tried to build with it, where's your development system? Well, you didn't have it. So we had to, and so that slowed a lot of people down. And Intel, the worst architecture out there, won because they had the best marketing.
And MOS Technology was a Sprague affiliate. They were in Quincy, Massachusetts. Capacitors. Peter Sprague was the chairman of the board of National Semiconductor.
We can talk about that later. I went back to Valley Forge, Pennsylvania, was where MOS Technology was. The problem, a funny story about that. So I'm going back there working with this company, and the company, MOS Technology, is having trouble. And at one point they said, the president pulls me over and says, Al, will you buy us? $1 million, you're going to have us. I said, what's going on? He said, well, we've been selling lots of chips and modules to Jack Tramiel. And Jack Tramiel is a very hard businessman, and one of his tactics was he never paid the bills unless he had to. And these guys weren't very smart. They were great technologists, but were not good businessmen, and they were almost out of business because they kept shipping to Jack. They should have cut him off. And now Jack was going to buy him for nothing and cancel his own debt, and they saw what they were going to do, and he says, you want to buy us? So I go back to Silicon Valley, I go back to Atari, and I said, hey, I want to buy a semiconductor company. He's going, what? I tell him the story, and Manny Gerard, one of the presidents of Warner, when I bounced the idea off of him, he says, are you crazy? He says, you guys can barely keep this thing afloat out here. How are you going to run a semiconductor company on the other coast? Good point. All right, so Jack Tramiel buys the company. And I remember vividly working on Division Street in Los Gatos, where we designed the chip with Jim Miner, Milner, and Larry Wagner, software guy. And I forget what I was going to say now. Anyway, the chip was just stripped down, and Joe comes in, Joe Keenan, the president, and he says, Al, you're 8502 microprocessor. Yep. And he says, now that's Jack Trammell's company. Yep. Who else makes this? Nobody. So we're sole sourced to Jack Trammell? Well, kind of. He says, guess what? What can your machine do with a 6800? I said, oh, we looked at it, it can move one tank very slowly. And like, oh. So I said, what if I get a second source up? So he says, okay. So I went back to M1 Technology and I said, I never dealt with Jack, I dealt with the other people. I said, look, how many do you want me to buy? How many do you expect me to buy? He said, like, 50,000 or something. I said, well, I'll give you a purchase order for 50,000 guaranteed on the condition I get a second source, and I want it to be Synertech out here. Okay. So I set up Synertech as a second source, and we bought exactly 50,000 from M1 Technology and bought millions from Synertech. And that was also, I had to get at the end here, but there's another story that goes on about Steve Jobs trying to buy 6902 microprocessors, but he couldn't because he's 18 years old and he can't get a credit card account. Anyway, thank you all very much.
transistors that go into that JK flip-flop, then
so there's that level of abstraction.
All right. And you draw that out by hand, and that's what
we had a calendar. We had one of the first computers that played around with a two-dimensional thing and just did layers. There was no higher level function. But we could do modules like, here's a JK flip-flop. Pop it down there and replicate parts that helped.
Okay, and then electronically that goes to the chip.
And it was because we bought our own Calma machine, okay? And all the semiconductor companies had 3 or 4 of them, and they run them all day and night. We just had one guy working on it with his own toy, one guy. And they said, if that one chip works, we'll make more money than
this is a layout machine.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I saw the pictures of the production. I saw the production cabinets for Pong, but there's also a cocktail type too. So when did they come along? And is that?
Well, there's one out.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
I know that they never really came out. They were ideas. We did Pong in a barrel. Problem was it was just a wine barrel. That's that one. And we did those, and we tried to do puppy Pong. So we never really came out. They did. That one there, I think, was made. I know it was made in 70s. It was a prototype. I think it was prototype. We made a few of them.
You mentioned they're not.
Everybody was in business. Anybody could make one. Yeah.
Is there a way to increase me with your autograph, please?
Sure.
Anywhere.
I'm from this area, but I just moved back.
Thank you so much for sharing your latest
Good talk.
Awesome talk.
Sure. It's a pleasure.
I actually got hired to Atari by Joe.
Joe Keenan?
Joe Keenan.
Oh, wow.
He and his wife were the counselors for my wife and I when we were getting married. She was Catholic and you had to do that.
Yeah, marriage experience. Yeah.
First thing he asked me is, what are you doing for work? I says, well, I just got laid off, so nothing. He says, you want a job? I go, sure. He says, well, here's my card. Take it to the address, which was on Greenwood.
Yeah.
Talk to...
Oh, he was at Key Games.
He was Key Games. But they were making Pong in that building there.
The home Pong thing.
Yeah, the home Pong.
Oh, that
Consumer.
One. Oh, you consumer. That was a consumer.
Yeah, it was like, I think I started in 75. And I said, take this to Angie. She'll give you a job. I do not know what it will be, but you'll have a job. I ended up in shipping, putting 4 staples in the bottom of the box. And I ended up in production as a supervisor. I built most of the 2600s.
Jim Tubb. Jim Tubb. You know who Jim Tubb is?
I know the name.
Ernest Tubb's nephew, the singer, the country western singer. And what happened when we started Consumer, it was funny. I had a business plan that talked about, and we had this new division called Consumer, and there was a whole org chart hand-drawn with rulers, and there was one name on it, my name. Nobody else wanted to be in it.
Nobody else.
And the manufacturing guy wanted to be in it because he was like, I'm doing corn out, we're doing well. Why would I want to do this thing? So Jim Tubb comes to my office and he says, I want to do that for you. I said, nobody else asked, so you got it. You got it, Jim.
That was fun. It was a great adventure. Nice meeting you. Great talk. Thank you.
Gary Bailey.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my God. You're out of jail. No. Nice to see you. Nice to see you.
Good to see you, Alex. I'm more than I love.
Some of it is true, too. Stories get better as they get older.
Anyway, good to see you again.
Nice to see you. Nice to see you.
Hi, how are you? I'm the guy who had to
Oh, yeah.
I think I work with you in college.
I've got this one.
It's from a...